Welcome to These Lads Are Mental. My name is Gary.
And I'm Neil, and our podcast is a lighthearted approach to normalise mental health. Before we start today's show, please listen to our disclaimer. This show is just a group of opinions and is not to be treated as medical advice. If you are struggling with mental health, please speak to your physician or reach out to a service such as Lifeline. Thank you. These Lads Are Mental recognises the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the custodians and traditional owners of Sydney. We pay respect to their ancestors and elders, past and present, and value their continuing connection to lands, living culture, and integral contribution to the bright and inclusive future of this beautiful city that we call home.
On today's show, we've got Alexandra Hudson.
Alex is the recent winner of the Melbourne Raw Festival back in April 2022. In this episode, we deep dive into the life of a comedian, the highs and lows, some of the challenges that they face. And Alex herself is really the hottest thing on the market right now when it comes to comedy. So her story itself is actually really interesting. We think you get a lot out of it.
Hi.
Hello, Alex.
Hiya, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Oh my God. I'm just getting dressed.
It looks like I'm in bed as well. It's all
Are you? Yeah.
Oh no, we've been up since 5:30.
Yeah, you would wake up really early.
We have Gary there, but I don't know. Is your audio working, Gaz?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi,
Hi.
sweet. Hi, how you doing? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
You're not again, full disclosure, you're not the first comedian that we've had on the show. We've actually had an Irish comedian.
Yeah, I listened to her.
Oh, did you? Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Oh, God, nice little bit of competitive Irish comedian.
I'm
Oh,
half English. I shouldn't say that, but
Oh, you're half English, are you?
so I'm really sorry about that.
Also, no pressure with her, but her podcast is technically our most popular podcast.
Oh,
Number one in the charts. It's number one in the charts.
yeah. She's been doing it a lot longer than me. She can have that.
Oh, here come the excuses.
She's not the Raw Comedy National winner, is she?
Oh,
Yeah.
That was amazing, actually. I know every time I see something come out from you now, you're winning a competition or you're headlining some place.
Yeah, I'm definitely not at the headliner level, but I've been doing some really epic gigs, which
Right.
are really fun. And yeah, it just keeps rolling one thing to the next thing. So I didn't expect any of this, and it's just been like the wildest thing I've ever done ever. And I'm just in it now, so I don't really understand anything beyond that. I'm just one thing to the next, like constantly just looking at my calendar. Oh, what do I have to do this week? Okay, sick. Work out what I have to do for that, and then just hopefully it goes well, and then just on to the next thing. So it's just insane.
Are you coming to Sydney anytime soon?
Yeah, I'm actually flying there in 3 hours.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You've got a gig here, I take it?
Yeah, I'm co-hosting on Triple J
Oh,
on Friday.
lovely.
Yeah, I'm co-hosting with Hobber and Hing. Michael Hing asked me to do it because I've done a few things with him, and he's the co-host of the Drive Show.
Yep.
Yeah, it's International Crippled Day, International Day of People with a Disability on the weekend. So
Wow.
I'm doing it as a part of that. So
Nice. That was good. Exciting.
yeah, so I'm going in there tomorrow to do some stuff with them, and then on the radio on Friday from 3 till 5:30.
Oh, cool. Cool. I need to give it a little listen.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I'm just gonna do a couple gigs tonight while I'm here. So
Whereabouts you going to do gigs?
I'm doing one at the Chippo in Chippendale.
Yeah, Chipdale, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's just an open micy situation, pretty chill. Gonna
Yeah.
try some newer stuff, see how it goes in Sydney.
Yeah, good.
Gary's a big comedy fan. I love that story that you told us, Gary, of a Scottish guy that you went to see, and then he had a few beers in him, and then he got up on stage, and then halfway through his joke, he forgot it. And then
Oh yeah, in Glasgow there's quite a famous actually comedy club called The Stand.
I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
famous, really good spot, quite intimate, quite ruthless as well, but it gets quite good comics going there. On a Tuesday, they do a thing called Raw Comedy Night. And it's like £1 to get in, or it might be like £2 now with inflation, but it used to be like £1. And you go, and it'd be a complete lottery of who you get. It could be, there's usually say 10 acts.
Yeah.
You'd always get the MC who was obviously good or fairly well established, and you
Yeah.
usually get a final act who was pretty well established. But the rest of it, sometimes it was just all amateurs or people doing it for the very first time.
Yeah.
And then sometimes like Frankie Boyle would just stand up on the stage and just by complete luck. And one of the guys, as Neil was explaining, he stood up and he got through. He told a few jokes and he bombed a little bit, but the crowd were like cheering him, come on, let's go. And he starts getting halfway through a joke and he goes, oh, and then I forgot. And then everyone starts going, oh no. And then he goes, I can't believe this is happening again.
That is my thing.
And then you were saying the music came on then or something?
It was like that song Reet Petite by Jackie Wilson. That just popped on. And it's just, that's enough, mate.
That is my biggest fear. I had a moment at the Comedy Store in Sydney, I don't know, 4 months ago. And because you say the same kind of thing. And because I'm new, I don't have a lot of material. So I'm doing the same sets over. And I had this moment on stage, like in the middle, where I couldn't remember if I'd already said it or if I was about to say it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, for a split second, I was just like, oh fuck, what is it? And I just was like, you just say it. And luckily, as I was saying it, I'm like, oh, I haven't said this. Okay, cool. But it was just because sometimes you're just in autopilot and you're just like saying stuff and often, and I'm always thinking about other stuff as I'm talking. So sometimes you can be like really present and other times you're just thinking about other things and it's an automatic thing. So it's a really odd feeling sometimes. Yeah.
I get that. I have a really bad habit of it. People used to rip about me because I'd retell stories all the time. And some like, mate, you've already told me that story.
Like, the weekend, you said like 5 times the same thing at the weekend. I'm like, you've told me this like 25 minutes ago.
Is that because you don't have many funny stories, so you're just gonna cycle through them?
Like, wait till I tell you about this one thing that happened to me, and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't think I'm gonna have a fledgling comedy career. It's funny you mentioned because I also listen to another podcast which is comedians in the UK. It's a football, like a soccer related one.
Yeah.
One of the episodes that I was listening to them only very recently, they were talking about the exact same thing that you were just talking about, Alex, where you go into this autopilot. The guy Josh Widdicombe, who's this like really hilarious British,
I know. Yeah.
so oh my god, he's just
so
like genius. Like everything that comes out of his mouth is just so funny. And he was comparing it to like how when you drive home sometimes, and when you get to that last stretch,
and you
where,
just
you don't even remember driving, and then you snap out of it and go, geez, was I driving there? And he said it gets a bit like that when you're on stage sometimes. And yeah, hopefully then the audience aren't gonna go, hey, you told us that at the beginning, mate. But that's a pretty good segue, because if anyone hasn't guessed already, like Alex is a comedian, our guest on this week's show. But if anyone that maybe hasn't come across you before, Alex, do you want to give us the lowdown of who you are, what's been happening for you? It sounds like the last couple of years have just gone to a whole nother level, but even a little bit of a background about who you are and where you're situated and what your story is.
Yeah, so my full name, what I use on stage is Alexandra Hudson. I live in East Ballina on the Northern Rivers, Bundjalung country. I've been living in this area for 12 years, and about 2 or 3 years ago, I did a workshop in Byron run by this local woman named Mandy Nolan. And I did a comedy workshop with her after 2 friends suggested that I do it. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll give it a go. And it's like a rite of passage for anyone in the Northern Rivers, I think. If you want to get into comedy, you do her course. And then, basically I did that. And I didn't really do anything with it for about 6 months. I told myself I'd do a gig by the start of 2020. And then lockdown happened. And I was just sitting at home in East Ballina and I was like, fuck, I'm never going to do this unless I just find a way to do it. And luckily there was a local thing happening where you could go and practice material in front of other open mic comedians in the local area. And you could it's called Shed Comedy. And basically I got into that. And so I started going there once a month. And the guy told me, he's like, oh yeah, you should try to bring something new every time you come. So I'd write new jokes like every month, I was just like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I guess I'll just try to write this. And some of it I'd just be like, it'd be like this half-baked thing where I don't even have an ending for it, but I just go, oh, maybe it'll just come to me. Or I don't know. Like I just feel like, is this how you write a joke sort of thing? Like I just wing it. And then, yeah, two guys in that asked me if I wanted to do a show in Lismore, and I did that in July 2020, and they gave me like a 10-minute spot, and I was like, whoa, like I don't even know what I have to fill 10 minutes. So
10 minutes seems like a lot on
10
stage.
minutes is a lot in comedy.
Yeah.
And especially if you're not doing well, it's an
Yeah.
insanity. It's great if you're crushing and you're really good and it flies by, but if you're not very good, it's a nightmare. So I think my first proper gig, I think I did 8.5 minutes. And I literally was just like, I do not know how this is going to go. And surprisingly, people laughed at me. And from there, I was really fortunate. Like, I started doing comedy in COVID, and like a lot of people, and I think a lot of people in the arts were struggling, and I was having the opposite experience where there was a moment when the borders closed to Queensland. So a guy was running a gig in Lennox and lost half his half his lineup to COVID. Wow. So then suddenly I'm getting an opportunity to perform, and that was like I think it was like my 4th gig, and I'm doing like a gig in Lennox with a few local pros in the area, and then from there it just started, like it just went bonkers. Like people would ask me to do things and I was just like, fuck, I've got to write material to make sure I'm funny. And yeah, and that's now it's taken me. Earlier this year in April, I was the joint winner at the Melbourne Comedy Festival Raw National Competition, which isn't the national open mic competition that they've been running for, I don't know, since the 90s. And it's like a lot of really well-known Australian comedians have come through there and gone on to do some really big things. And one of the prize for winning is they fly you to Edinburgh and you perform at So You Think You're Funny at the Fringe Festival.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Yeah. So I spent 2 weeks at the Fringe just watching shows and doing spots, and yeah, it was like wild. I was just like, I can't even believe I'm here.
Yeah, the Fringe Festival's big, man. That's
yeah.
good.
And it was unreal. Like, it looks like the most soul destroying and exhilarating experience all together in one.
Yeah, I wonder with Scotland, because you guys have Scottish people would have a real sense of humor, right? Even thinking of Irish English, but Scots would always be like, I'd say it's probably I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it must be, if you can make it in Scotland, you must be doing pretty good, right? Because I'd say the standards are quite high when it comes to humor.
Yeah,
is that me or?
I don't know.
Wow, Gary, what do you reckon?
I mean, I can't say I'm not a comedian, but I think I
say, like, if you were somewhere like America or something, I feel like jokes might land a little bit.
well, the humor's a little bit different, I think. But in Scotland, I would say, I mean, this is a very blanket statement, but everyone does have a lot of banter about them, Scottish people, because the humor's quite harsh. Everyone's quite likes a bit of harsh humor, quite a lot of dark humors in Scotland as well. No one takes themselves too serious. So yeah, as you're brought up, it might be changed now in the modern era, but growing up, people always just slag each other.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it's always been. So that comes with humour. So you just take things a little bit more light-hearted way.
Glasgow or is it Edinburgh where they have the cone on that statue in the city?
Glasgow, that's Glasgow.
Glasgow, and then they tried to take it down and it got put back up to try to take it down.
Yeah, that was just stays there now.
Yeah, they just said fuck it, it just stays there because like
that's really good.
Which is also, even though it might be a lion's den almost for comedians, it also is probably a place where you can probably get away with saying more than you could somewhere else. Yeah.
Scotland, like how you're describing it, sounds like the Brisbane scene to me.
All right, okay.
Brisbane is notorious for being really difficult, especially if you're like from Sydney or Melbourne. I think it's typically Melbourne is seen as like having the nicest kind of open, supportive kind of audiences, and Sydney's kind of second behind them. But then Brisbane is just its world of its own. Wow. It's kind of just like how they are in the world, basically. And you can just be like, they don't care who you are even. They just, if you're not funny and they don't think you're funny, they won't give you anything. And like within that, they're really supportive and the scene is really great. And some of arguably the best kind of comedians are coming through there. Like that's where I started, because like a lot of people, I got a lot of support early and basically started gigging pretty early, like 2020 in Brisbane. And then from there, like that just made me a much better comedian so much faster, because you just have to be really quick and get them on side quickly. And like you were saying about Scotland, I have a really dark sense of humor.
Yep.
And I talk about being disabled, and like my opening joke is really hectic. And I don't really let people off the hook either. I really lean into making them feel uncomfortable, because for me that's more enjoyable and there's a much bigger payoff at the end. And I think Brisbane is good. Like if you can work out how to be funny in Brisbane, you can be funny anywhere.
No, yeah, that's good. That's good. It's a good litmus test, really, innit? So if you can do Brisbane, you're thinking Sydney and Melbourne's going to be a little bit easier.
Yeah, I love going down. It's sometimes you can feel really demoralized by a gig in Brisbane and then go to Sydney and you're like, oh.
They like me. Someone said that as well. I don't know if it was Emma or someone else saying that she would deliver material in one venue, drive half an hour down the road and deliver the same material and get crickets.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make any sense.
You can't explain what makes something funny on the night. Some nights you have and they feel like magic and you're like, this is the best feeling ever. And then other nights you're like, I want to burrow into a hole and never do comedy again in my life.
But I think it's interesting that, because obviously when you go to comedy gigs, like an actual stadium tour or a massive comedian, everything's funny because that whole room is filled with their fans. But when you're starting out, you're literally touring around trying to find your fans. And for all those nights where you feel like, oh, I could just burrow into a hole and hide and don't want to do comedy again, there might be one person in that crowd though who thought you're hilarious. So when you do get bigger, they'll follow you to that next gig. And it's trying to grow that. I think that must be so difficult, because you have to bomb to find your fans almost.
Oh yeah. And I think as well, like you have to bomb to, it makes really good. It makes you feel confident. If you can get through a bomb and just know that it's like not you necessarily, or maybe it's something you still need to work out, or it's just it makes you a better performer having done really bad rooms, because it makes you just want to back yourself more and be like, okay, how can I work this out? How can I make this really funny for you? And there's always going to be like, we perform in spaces where there's like sport on in the background or people are playing pool. And in Brisbane, where there's people in the crowd vomiting because they're drinking fish bowl, like cocktails and all sorts of stuff. Like sometimes it's just really rowdy, and like you're lucky. Yeah, sometimes you're even lucky to just get off stage and be okay. Like I've never really got heckled too much, because I think people are scared to heckle the crowd.
Yeah, I can imagine there's some dingy RSL somewhere in Queensland going, oh. But yeah, if you think about Melbourne though, Melbourne is like a real live, giggy kind of scene generally.
Yeah.
So imagine there's way more opportunities almost there as well.
I think, so.
Even the comedy gig, like I've been to that one that you mentioned in Melbourne as well. It's quite popular there, which is good. But
sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to ask you, where is the biggest place you bombed? What was your biggest bomb?
I've only bombed like a handful of times, but I'd say the worst one was a sports club on the Gold Coast. And it was just like a big, vast space where for me, it was just like the jokes were going out and just nothing was coming back. And this space was just like this sports bar. So there were people having dinner and like
on the pokies.
Oh yeah, the pokies were like right next to it. So it just, even we tried to get the audience to sit together and they wouldn't. All just spread out in this.
Mom, listen.
That's tough.
Like vast empty space, and it was just like, oh, okay. And advice I was given was you can acknowledge it once and then just move on, because everyone knows you're bombing. You don't need to keep talking about it. So my thing is I'll just finish my set and be like, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting because like even with hecklers, I was Jimmy Carr, like I love him, he's class. And how he my favorite thing about him is how he deals with hecklers.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's the funniest part of the gig. And I think how on earth can he be so on the ball with coming back about I can't try to remember now at some of the ones he had, but I'm like, geez, like the genius behind being able to take something like that, run with it, flip it, and then come out on top. Like it really is like a master craft, isn't it?
I'm still scared to interact with the audience too much, but I'm like, I love hearing shit like that. I'm like, I want to do that. I had a thing happen in Tweed Heads. We were doing like a Sydney comedy showcase tour thing, and it was just like the rowdiest Tweed's like on the New South Wales Queensland border. It's just a rowdy town. And it was the day it was the day that the Queen had died, and we were performing in this like ex-services club venue thing, and they had her big photo on the screens outside, and we're just like, oh, this gig is gonna just be awful. And the MC was getting heckled before people were even sitting down, because the show they were really strict about when the show had to start, so people were still making their way to their seats, and the MC's just getting heckled as people are walking to their seats. And then there was this one woman who was heckling all through the show to everyone, and then she didn't do it to me. And later on, after the show had finished, like the other comics and I were walking to the pub, and we ran into her on the street, and she's just, oh yeah, like I do comedy and all this stuff. And we're like, why were you heckling? And she's going on. And then she gets to me and she's, I didn't heckle you because, and she paused. And we're all thinking, because I'm disabled. And she's, because you won Raw.
Oh.
It's like bullshit. Like we know there's a line and people are scared.
Shitbag guy. To bomb in front of people, did that have any impact on your mental health?
No, as I said, I think in the moment it can make you want to burrow into the ground and never do it again.
Yep.
But the thing about comedy is, I was thinking about this earlier, Neil, when you talk about doing the same story over and over again. That's what you'd actually be a great comedian, because you end up saying the same stuff over 100, 200 times, whatever. So it's really, you might have bombed on that particular night, but you might have done it 50 more times in another room and crushed it. So I think you don't take the bomb, you don't take it as a real, I feel like if you're bombing every day, that would definitely have an impact on your mental health. But typically, if you're crafting your material and working on it and developing it, a bomb might just be something that happens once a month or every few months or whatever. Like, they're just a part of it. And I think they do actually make you a better performer. And I think, yeah, you got to just, there's so much about comedy. I think you got to, I don't think everyone in comedy, I think, has a lot of mental health stuff probably going on. We're not the most well-adjusted normal people in the world, which are like Bill Burr is a perfect example of that. Yeah. So I think it's just, for me, it's just like, managing your mental health and going, okay, like you are obviously, you're in a space where if people don't find you funny, they don't laugh, and that's what you need in comedy. So I think it can be really challenging for your mental health, definitely, because you're always constantly in front of people getting tested and tried and being like, is this good? Just putting yourself out there a lot. But I think I found it's made me a more confident person. And I love being in the space of comedy, and like when a gig goes well, there's nothing better than that. It's just like the rush you get is just, like and I know now as well, when I've got a joke, I'm like, oh, my nan, I've got more in common with my nan, and you know, it's really great because she also likes to share her endone with me. And I know if they laugh at that, they're gonna laugh at everything I say. And that's just like me in the beginning. I'm just like, oh cool, they're on side already, so that's like the rest of it's easy.
But you flipped it on its head, really, haven't you? Like, you mentioned your disability, but if anything, you've used that to I don't think like your advantage, but that's like who you are, and you really
Yeah.
lean into that in everything you do. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of forms some of your comedic act?
Yeah, so I was born sandwiched between my brother and my sister. As a result of that, they gave me brain damage. That's not true. But I basically
Always blame the sibling.
it's their fault. So in my set, I call myself a cripplet. But yeah, so basically I was born with a neurological condition called cerebral palsy. So it's a condition that affects the way your brain. So I've got like brain damage in one part of my brain, but it also affects like my coordination, the way my brain communicates with my muscles. Like it's a really weird kind of thing. Like my body just does weird shit all the time. And so a lot of what I talk about is like how I experience the world through that lens. Like I do jokes about walking, and people are like, why are you talking about walking? But it's because walking for me has been such a point of my life where I've tried to walk normally and never. And I'm always thinking about, I walk, but I have this like love-hate thing with it. Like I hate to do it. It's good for me. I'm not very good at it, but I'm good enough at it. But I hate, like I live near the beach, and I do this walk every few days where I walk to the end of a break wall. And I just don't get the point. Like people walk for exercise to the end of the break wall, and there's no end. Like you literally just have to turn around.
You tell them back home
And walk the way you came. I'm like, why do people like do this? I just hate walking. I'm just like, oh, I just can see my house like so far off into the distance, and I'm just like, why did I do this? So that's a lot of kind of just like my observations and the things I experience that I think are funny. Yeah,
I read in an article, I think you're featured in Mamma Mia, where you were talking about how when people do recognize it, it almost is better for you in terms of how you do your comedy, because what you were saying, if walking is a challenge, you might not be walking on stage, so people might go, what is she talking about?
Yeah.
How have you juggled that? Do you have to like say things straight off the bat so people know, or?
No, so I deliberately don't. My first joke is about my siblings giving me brain damage. So I immediately like talk about that I'm a cripple, but I don't tell them what it is.
Yep.
Okay. And I deliberately do that. There's only one point when I then talk about the Queensland sex joke where I actually explain like the condition I have. But that's 4.5 minutes in, sort of thing. But it was funny because I typically, like in a smaller gig, I need help onto the stage. So the MC will usually just help pull me up, sort of thing, give me an arm basically. So people have that instant recognition, oh, there's something not quite right with her. I've done a few gigs where I've walked out and it's a big stage, and so they haven't seen me come up the stairs or anything from behind the curtain, and I've walked out so confidently, and then halfway through my set I'm like, oh my god, they don't know that I'm a cripple, and they're freaking out. They're like, why is she talking like this? Like they're already like not sure if they can laugh, so it's even worse. Oh no, what did she say? So now in a big gig I get someone to walk me to the microphone, and then and then at the end I walk off, and I walk off on my own, and I'm often thinking, I wonder if they're realizing that I do it also because I like making them feel a little bit uncomfortable. For me the payoff is a lot better if they're a little scared of me.
yeah.
And they're looking for that relief.
Yeah. That's okay, I can laugh, I think.
They're like, oh god.
Yeah.
How you do that, because it's very unique, and I think that shows in your rise to success over the last few years, how you deliver that, and all what you've just said to us, how you tell the jokes, how you strategize what goes first, what you do say, what you don't say. It's really brilliant how it all gels together. And I think as a listener or as a watcher, everything you just described there, certainly like relate to that, let's say, as being an audience member. And the jokes are just like, that Queensland joke is just,
Yeah.
it's kind of, I'm not saying it's like your thing, but like when Gary and I were first chatting about you coming on the show, I was like, you've got to listen to this joke. It's so funny, and we'll play it
Cool.
in the edit so people can listen to it. But it's genius. And yeah, how do you find that's obviously taken you time? Has it taken you gigs to master that art? And do you
For
find
sure.
are people, does the reception vary, or do you think overall people are actually quite warm and open and authentic about it?
No, it definitely varies. Like I did a gig in Ballina at the RSL, I think called The Big Gig, and it's a month long. It's every month, and they get some really big names coming through, like Tom Gleeson, who's a national. He's like on a show on the ABC called Hard Quiz. He's the host of that, and he's like a proper well-known. He won the Gold Logie, I think, 2 years ago. Anyway, so he often headlines it. It's every month in Ballina. So it's a free gig. So it sells, like everyone comes, but it's in an RSL. So the demographic is like anywhere from 30 to kind of 70-ish. And I did that gig for the first time in June, and I was like, okay, there was just moments of complete silence because I think they were just not sure. So it's like, oh, so they'd laugh and then they'd be really quiet, and then they'd laugh and then they'd be really quiet.
I was gonna say though, depending on the RSL audience, they might just be asleep or like
Yeah, well, that's also true.
give them a nod.
Yeah, I think sometimes people are not sure, but typically, like I love performing there's some really great little kind of dungeony clubs around the place that are epic to perform in, because just everything you say they're just into from the first second, and it's just like the atmosphere is just like made for comedy, and so those gigs are really good. But I definitely have moments where people are like, oh god, and so it varies a lot, but typically it's a really good response. I usually get people on side. Yeah,
I think what helps, so I was going to say, I think a big thing that, I mean, from anybody doing public speaking things, I've always been taught is the likability factor is when you can make fun of yourself very quickly. That instantly psychologically puts people on board. If I say something about how I look or what I'm wearing, and a lot of comedians, sometimes you know yourself, and they walk onto the stage and you look a bit funny, you're laughing before they've even said a word.
Yeah,
that is the best possible start, and then they'll comment on it. And then you instantly want to like them because you feel like, oh, they're not exactly loving themselves. They're poking fun at themselves, so they've already won you over.
Yeah. And I think I won't ever make fun of like my disability in the sense of putting myself down or anything. But I'm definitely very much aware that I'm a weird and do shit in a weird way and see things even just how I move through the world is not normal. And I can talk about that stuff because I know it. Yeah, it's true. And some of the shit is funny to me. So
what have the challenges been like, even in your life with cerebral palsy, or do you feel like where you are now, it's given you this amazing platform in life? Or
yeah, I think actually the biggest thing for me was mental health stuff around having a disability and growing up with a disability. Growing up, I didn't want to be disabled, and I almost actively tried not to be and it wasn't until I reached my early 20s, that I'd always known that how I am is actually okay, but it was at odds to what I was experiencing. So it took me a few more years to actually realize, no, I need to actually work on this stuff and work through it to be okay in this world, because I'm going to be like this forever, and the world isn't changing quickly. So I just have to like learn how and develop coping strategies to exist in this world. So for me, it was like in my late 20s, I started seeing a psychologist regularly and working through stuff that I'd been through. Like I've had quite a few surgeries from when I was really young to in my early 20s, and all these sort of like medicalized trauma things. It's funny to me because in some spaces I'm really self-conscious, and then in other spaces I'm really confident, and I'm an overly confident kind of extroverted person, and then other times I want to just shut down and just not leave my room, because for whatever external factor that may have triggered something in me, I'll be like, oh no, I need to shut down. But for me, it was like finding that space of finding someone like a professional, a psychologist that I could meet with on a regular basis and talk to. And so when I first started seeing a psychologist, when I think I was 27 and I'm now 35, I was like seeing him once a fortnight almost, and crying constantly and just feeling sad and all these things. And then now I like look at my life and I see him maybe once a month or every 2 months, depending on what's happening in my life. And I almost can't believe that this is where it's led me to. And I definitely attribute it to managing my mental health and making myself be like, oh, I'm okay as a disabled woman. My body and how I move through the world is okay and important and valuable. And I think that's given me all the opportunities I now am seeing. And it's just like, in comedy was a really cool thing for me, because I realized like I've never really felt comfortable in any particular space. But like when I'm up on stage performing, I own that space. That's my space, that I can decide what people know about me.
Yeah.
I'm not just walking down the street and some guy's saying shit or whatever, or someone's questioning something, or so that for me was like a really cool thing to come out of comedy, and that realization and that journey like of finding, because I've always felt like my struggle with mental health is simply because I'm disabled, and if I weren't disabled, I maybe wouldn't have as many of the struggles mentally as I do, because I do think deep down I am a very like optimistic, happy person, but it's just through the course of my life, that's not really part of the course for a person who grows up with a disability. There's a lot of trauma and identity stuff and denial and like rejection and exclusion. So I think that for me was just like having to like have a space where I could talk about those things and rationalize those things and take the onus off me and put it onto like the external world was like the biggest kind of. And like I get a lot of liberation from actually having a disability, because I can do things on my own terms, because the way we perceive disability is like we get celebrated for doing the most mediocre things almost, because people can't believe we actually can do stuff. Like the bar is so low for us that it's been really like a big liberation for me of, oh, I can work it out and do this on my own terms.
I think that's a brilliant segue into one of the questions we've got, because when we were doing some research on your background, etc., that one of the phrases I seen you use was inspiration porn.
Yeah.
So I watched a few of all the sets that I could find online. So obviously I was laughing away. And then I read a few articles on inspiration porn, and I was like, oh, I'm actually guilty of that straight away. But then I was thinking, oh, good on her. Like, you've wrote a book recently, I've seen that as well. But at the same time, very admirable what you've achieved. Can you explain a bit more what I've just rambled on around regarding inspiration porn?
Yeah, so inspiration porn is just this idea that anything a disabled person does is like, it's viewed through this lens of disabled people struggle so much, and their life is so hard, so anything they do is considered like really triumphant, and then in turn like inspiring. And there's a classic meme, I think it's like it's a little girl, and she's like an amputee, and she's got 2 blades on, and it just says something like, what's your excuse? It's just this idea that her life must be so difficult, and yet she's out there giving it a go, basically. So it's used as this tool to inspire non-disabled people. And I had this classic experience happen when I was working at Woolies, and I was cleaning up a spill of washing powder, and a guy approached me, and he's chatting to me, and he's praising me, and really just interested in. I'm like, bro, I'm just cleaning up this bill. But yeah, anyway, later on my boss comes over to me and he's from the local paper. He thinks you're really impressive because he's noticed that I have CP, and he wants to write an article about you.
Or can that wash brother?
And I'm just like, wow, I can clean spills that I created. And so I think that's the thing, is we're seen but the issue is we're seen as like remarkable, but it's like we exist in a world that's not built for us. So of course people are gonna, and we're often segregated and excluded, and we're not necessarily visible in our community. So these things aren't thought of. So these ideas are just like perpetuated. I will say it was like a really funny thing for me, because everyone, like, you know, public speaking is, I think, a lot of people's number one fear. And so a lot of people would come up to me after the show and be like, "You're so inspiring." And then I had a non-disabled friend tell me that happens to her too. So I was like, oh, I was being like really angry at these people. And I was like, oh, wait, okay, it's just a comedy thing. I was like,
Yeah.
I had to pull back and be like, okay, so I shouldn't have told that lady off.
Yeah. Where did you think you are? Because I used to work with Special Olympics, which was sports for people with intellectual disability.
Yeah.
And I was guilty of going in for the interview for the job. I was like, I'm not qualified. Like, how do
I thought you competed, did you not, Sally?
I didn't make the cut. I'm not good
You
enough.
wishes.
Came third.
I wish I came fourth place. No, but and then I'm quite, you know, like what you were saying, Alex, extrovert as well and gregarious. So you just throw yourself in there. And what I learned in the course myself, and then end up going and speaking to schools and so forth about Special Olympics, is that you don't need to do anything else. Like, you don't have to act differently to someone who has special needs, for example. You just be yourself, and they're themselves, and it shouldn't even be a thing.
Yeah.
And what used to really bug me about it, sometimes people say, oh God, I feel so sorry for them, or things like this, or I wonder what their life is like. I'm not like anyone that I met, especially the happiest people I've ever met in my life. And they used to bring so much joy, like to me. And like, I used to think it was the best job I've ever had in my life. I was so lucky to even be there and have the privilege. And they competed like just like anybody else, won medals, trained hard, all those kind of. And so I was kind of thinking, do you think, I mean, we're trying to solve this massive question here, but like, what is the solution with all this? Is it just that it isn't a thing and that we can just talk about it? It's a little bit like mental health, maybe, when the stigma around it. If we just talked about it daily, it would be this thing, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is like representation and visibility in the community, in mediums like TV, news. If we're just included in any aspect of any life, like, it just normalizes it. Like, at the moment we're just like so separate almost. And yeah, and very much like mental health, it's like the more you talk about it and destigmatize it, and the more visible it is in our community, then the less, like, it's great. It's great to be celebrated. Like, who doesn't love that? But it's just, we don't want to be celebrated just because you think of us in a certain way, so therefore everything we do is amazing. It's it's like, sometimes it's hard to tell, like, if someone's actually genuinely, and I actually feel this pressure sometimes. I have to be funnier than a non-disabled person, because I don't want people to think that they've just given me this spot. And I think a lot of people who are disadvantaged or marginalized feel that it's almost like this thing of, I have to work harder because otherwise people are going to think they just gave it to me because they're like ticking a box, or
you've got to like prove yourself.
Got to prove myself. But I think it just, the more that like things like accessibility get addressed and we're visible in the community, and in like TV and all sorts of things where we're typically not seen much, all those things will help to overcome this idea of like how we actually are in the world, and overcome this, like the inspiration thing, and even the pity, and there's a lot of stuff, like even all the mental health stuff I've been through, it's not because I'm disabled, it's because of how disability is treated within this country.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a really
Like,
good point.
I love being disabled, and like now I get to tell jokes on a national stage in Melbourne and win a national competition. Like, I think that's every male comedian's dream.
That is unbelievable.
It is.
That's with the TEDx talk that I mentioned already.
Yeah.
As I say that, when I first seen you on a TEDx talk, I thought that's brilliant. And then when I read your caption you put on Instagram,
Yeah.
I found it really interesting just to see regarding like how it became, because a lot of people I speak to in this sort of world of entrepreneurship or leadership, that's one of those like milestones people like to have, is I want to do a TED talk.
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk us through your experience?
So I think for me, I'll say it was definitely an experience. I'm glad I did it. And I'm so grateful that I was given the opportunity, because I was able to like really delve into the Queensland joke and kind of these ideas that I've talked about on this, which is attitudes and kind of exclusion that exists, that kind of has made this law still exist. But for me, it's also like, it's not a comedy space. And just for me, things I can't explain, like sometimes I'm just really self-conscious if I know there's 300 people staring at me in a really intimate space and I'm about to be a bit like, and I'm already feeling a bit intimidated, and like as a response my kind of brain goes into overdrive, and then it does weird shit to my body, like it's just sending messages, like so my leg muscles will like contract. So even and it happens in comedy, like sometimes I'll be just swaying, I hold on to a mic stand and I'll just be like swaying on it because my leg muscles are just like contracting, and to the point where I can't, and sometimes I just can't switch it off because it's just like happening and I'm having to like deliver this thing. So I think that for me was already a factor. And then I touched on in my Instagram post, which was like, we performed at the Byron Communities Theatre, which is a beautiful space and it's a beautiful performance space, but it's quite inaccessible as a performer to navigate, like from the backstage, from the green room to the stage to the to just get around. So you have to go up and down like a narrow spiral metal staircase. And so for me, it was just like, the day was quite chaotic. There were a lot of speakers, there were a lot of performers all in the green room. So it was even just like finding a quiet space to go. So like in the moment, it was just like a kind of overwhelming, and it was a lot of work. Like it was like 6 weeks of just like learning a TED talk basically. And so I think at the end, like I was just relieved it was over.
Yep.
Even just I walked off stage and I just wasn't super happy with how it came, like how I delivered it. And I think that was just me. Like it wasn't, the response I got was still really great and everyone gave me awesome feedback, but just in my head I was just like, no, I didn't like that. What did I do here? I spoke too quickly. And another thing with CP, if you're nervous you talk really fast, and I think it's just a thing, like, and I don't think it's just a CP thing, but I think it happens to a lot of people.
Oh yeah, I do it all the time.
Where you get nervous and you just hear yourself talking. Whereas like this, I was just like, fuck, like I was just really aware of like how anxious it made me. And then when I got off stage, it was almost like this relief of, and I just like burst into tears, and it took me about half an hour to be okay again. And it was just like a relief of, I don't know what that was. And my friends were there and they were like, no, it was really good. Don't be hard. And I'm fortunate that I have like mental health strategies in place. So I was able to like not go too far down into things and like really like hate on it and stuff. And it's been like a month and a half since I've done it now. So I in the moment, it was just like, as well, like comedy, I perform comedy and it's really confident, but that I just felt so outside my comfort zone. And I think part of it was just like having 300 people who they just want to hear this fantastic idea, and they're like, and I'm presenting what I think is actually pretty basic stuff oh, disabled people have sex, but there's this law that suggests we don't, and all this sort of stuff. And sometimes I get annoyed, like in terms of like how far we've progressed as a society, that we still have to talk about stuff in disability that's basic, I feel.
Yeah.
And a lot of other disabled people feel like we should have moved on from stuff. And yeah, so all those things considered, I'm really grateful that I've done it. Like my goal with the TED Talk was to get the Queensland, to get it out there more, and have it shift it from being like a joke on stage to actually like what it means in reality, and how it means in terms of disability stuff. So I was really happy to have done it. And all in all, like the TEDx team were like super supportive and all that sort of stuff. Like it was a good day.
It's a funny setting for you as well, because that TED Talk, how long's a TED Talk? 10 minutes, 7 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Yeah. You've got 10 minutes usually where you're most confident in a room where silence is the worst possible thing for you.
Yeah.
Whereas TEDx is just going to be all silent, wait until you finish the 10 minutes, and then you might get your applause, and you don't know when it's coming. Whereas a comedy, you get a feel as you go. You go, that didn't land. I can get a laugh, and then you can get some momentum. TEDx, I've got no idea how this is going. That's tough, man.
I was lucky. I did have comedy weaved through it.
Did you? Okay.
People were laughing, which is good.
Yeah, okay.
But it was it's still quite serious. And I'm like talking about things that people they're like, I can't believe this exists. And I'm just like,
when's it live?
I'm not sure. It's got to be soon. I think it's got to be in the next couple of weeks.
I was listening to a speaker not long ago on a podcast, and he done a TED Talk, and he's actually the most popular TED Talk in the world. And he said when he done his, a full year passed and it wasn't live. So he just thought, they must have thought it was crap. But then it came out and now it's the most popular one in the world.
Whoa.
So there you go. No pressure.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks for sharing that, Alex, because I think the thing that was really ringing home for me there was just thank you for sharing your vulnerability and the realism around that experience, because we asked a lot of people, even on this podcast, what does success mean to you? We even asked Michael that last week. And on one face of it, you think being on TEDx is a success, but then what people don't look at is the real impacts of putting yourself on stage, being really vulnerable. And I can certainly relate to that, because I get social anxiety as well, which it's kind of like the more successful you get, the worse, or the more that's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Standing in front of a boardroom or speaking to investors, if your business does well, you're going to be in those places more often. Even thinking about that now gives me the jitters. And that's probably a whole nother subject to tackle that. But the more success, the more things you have to deal with.
And I think this is why mental health stuff is so important, and it should really be a part of everyone's kind of self-care. And that's how I treat seeing a psychologist as doing any of the other things that I have to do in my life. And there's obviously a few things that I probably have to do more or be more conscious of than maybe other people, but not really. It's all the same.
But I'm just thinking, I was asking on a TEDx thing tomorrow, I really don't know whether I could do it from an anxiety point of view. And then if you said no, then is that that goes through your head then of going, like coward, or you're not good enough. And so it really does send you through this like spiral of what is it okay to say no to, whereas the whole parameters of society are saying it's TEDx, you've got to do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's even, I feel a bit guilty that I just didn't have this like super empowering epic experience. Like I feel, but I'm just like, nothing. I think like you're allowed to feel how you feel, and I think it's also, I don't think one should feel guilty if they decline a TED Talk, or you have strategies in place to make sure you're comfortable in that space, and to be like, at the end of the day, it's just another thing out there on the ether of the internet. Not everyone's going to have the #1 TED Talk.
Yeah, because is it a bit like we've spoken with a guy, getting that car or landing that house or landing that partner is not going to give you like the answer. It's not going to make you feel. It's what's inside you.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, it's almost like an analogy for all that, right? That like it's
Yeah.
whatever that is, it might mean the world to somebody, but not to everybody.
Yeah.
And you mentioned some of those strategies. Would you feel comfortable sharing maybe even just one strategy that you've used throughout your journey that has helped you?
So I do a lot of writing, and I'll write if leading up to things. Leading up to my TED talk, I was like writing about it, not a lot, but just like whenever sometimes I'd even just write, you're okay, you've got this, you've done the work, just like breathe. Just like I find it easy for me if I even just write the things that like help me, like to just remind myself to breathe and to just get fresh air. And just sometimes I might write myself like almost like a mini checklist of just
Go
things
for a
to be
walk.
aware of in the moment, because you get so caught up in the thing that you may not be like, if I had sat myself in the green room and just stayed in that green room the whole time before I performed, I would have gone crazy. But I knew to remove myself and take myself to a quieter space and just have space where I pace around a lot, like during a comedy gig and stuff. So I was just like ensuring that I did those little things. So I think that's for me, like managing my expectations leading into it and not being hard on myself, which I like. And I will say I was hard on myself a little bit afterwards, but it was just like checking and being like, no, you actually are okay. You did this, and nothing's ever going to be perfect, especially something you've not ever really performed. That would like comedy you do 100 times. Like before I did the Raw final in Melbourne, I'd done that set nearly 100 times. So I was confident in that. I knew that inside out. Whereas TEDx, I didn't quite feel that. Like I'd studied it, I'd practiced it, I'd memorized it up until a point, but it was like I'd never actually spoken it outside in a performance setting before. So it was a whole different thing. So I was just like, oh, don't be hard. So I think it's just like little reminders to myself of it's going to be okay. You're okay. And for me, it's just like my biggest strategy is like writing, and then annoying things which I despise, like exercise and eating. So these are the things I hate doing, but I do them, and when I'm doing them, I do enjoy them. Yeah.
I think that's a common trend, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone doesn't like it until they do it and they go, actually, that was quite good.
Yeah, you're like, damn it, I wanted to hate walking.
One thing I want to touch on before we do the little wrap up and quick fire questions is you've got a book.
Yeah, I'd been approached by a Sydney-based comedian who curated the series, and there's 6 of us comedians, and yeah, we were just given free reign. We share our book, so it's like I share with the 2020 Royal winner Prue Blake, and so we could pretty much just write whatever we wanted on our section of the book. And I wrote about a random family holiday that we took to visit my dad's family in the States when we were 10 years old, because it was the first time I was like having a conscious memory of my aunties and uncles and being like, oh, this is where all my weirdness comes from. Yeah. And so, yeah, I just wrote a little kind of mini memoir, just not really anything profound, but I just wanted to write about that experience and my grandma and that sort of stuff. And yeah, so it comes out in the 2nd of December, or I think that's when it's starting to get printed. I'm not too sure, but yeah,
nice quality.
But these lads are mental exclusive.
Yeah.
Oh, look, Alex, to be honest, we're fed up with all the people that we get on the show. Every fucker that comes on is writing a book or done a TEDx.
So annoying.
That is inspirational is what it is. It's very inspirational.
Yeah, I know we should rename the podcast. Credit to you. You've done an amazing job, particularly in the last few years. And yeah, I feel like every time I see something of you, I'm like, oh, gosh, you're absolutely
I
killing.
know, it's wild. Hey,
Yeah.
hey, I don't want to rush you, but I have to leave in 5 minutes. Is that
So quick fire questions will take probably 90 seconds?
Yeah.
So on you go.
Yeah, sorry, I just don't want to.
No, you're good. You're good. So the last section, Alex, is our quick fire section. So we ask the same things of all of our guests. There's 4 questions in total. So just whatever the first thing that pops into your head, just send it back. Number one, when are you at your happiest?
When I'm at a gig in the mosh pit with my friends or on stage doing comedy.
Love it. Next one is, what's your current mental health out of 10?
I'd say it's probably like about a 7, just because I've had a lot of stuff. I've had a few like little CP niggly frustrating things. I get really frustrated because most of the time everything works pretty well. So if something goes a bit off kilter, it can be annoying to work it out, because it just, the way my brain works, everything just takes a bit longer. So at the moment, I'd say it's like a 7-ish, but I'm like working on it. So it's good. I'm happy with that. It's not always, I'm never a 10 basically anyway. So yeah.
Oh, like that's a good solid score. And then where do you think the world is in terms of mental health awareness out of 10?
Oh, I think it's pretty abysmal, sadly. Even yesterday, I heard of someone, a family member of a woman I was meant to do a gig with, died by suicide. And I've had a lot of experience with suicide of friends and a few family members throughout my whole life. And I think me and my friends had a pretty horrific experience happen 7 years ago, where our best friend's boyfriend took his own life in our house. And that really, within our friendship group and within our wider friendship group, really shifted, like within ourselves, we've become way more open about our mental health as a result of that. And because he was only 24, it was a really horrible experience, and he'd gone through a lot of stuff through his life. So I think for me, it's something I'm really open about. I'm always happy to talk about. There's a time and a space, and I think the best thing you can do is seek out any kind of professional help, whatever that looks like for you, and figuring it out. But it's important to know that nothing can be solved if we don't talk about it and we aren't open with it. And that for me is mental health. And I think there are shifts happening within smaller communities and things like this. And I think governments and all that sort of thing need to catch up and actually provide us the services, because there's a massive gap between someone wanting to seek support and actually seeking support or having access. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing that I felt, like even just a financial disadvantage. It's so vast, so people don't want to seek it out because they know it's going to be a financial burden. So I think for me, that's the biggest thing. Yeah.
Very well said. And I think that's very solid advice. And yeah, you mentioned it on about going to psychologists bi-weekly. At one point I was going weekly, and like it's fucking not cheap, hey? Like you get the government's 10 mental health plan, which seems great, and that goes pretty quickly. And you've got to plow ahead. Now that's really appreciate you sharing that as well. And then the final question is, if you had one piece of advice to give someone that they could do every day to improve their own mental health, what would that be?
I'd say just check in with yourself in whatever way that looks like. Just take, even for me, it's writing. So it's just like writing about the things I'm doing, the things I'm having done, like looking forward, and just seeing, like writing down my feelings and stuff I'm thinking about around that. So I think that's just check in with yourself and try to practice a bit of mindfulness. Like I don't meditate, I'm not good at any of that stuff, but I think just having a time and a space that I carve out, and it's not even a dedicated time, it's something I'm conscious of, where I'm like, oh, I haven't checked in with myself for the last week. So it's just like I then will do it in that moment. I think that's for me. Making time and just being like, where am I at? Am I going good? Okay, am I happy? What can I do to make myself feel better? Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I know you're in a rush, Alexandra. Can you just quickly let people know where to find you, or if you want to reach out to you or whatever?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way is Alexandra Hudson Comedy on Instagram. That's my handle. I do have a website, Alexandra Hudson Comedy, I think, .com. I don't know how to update it. My friend is teaching me. So if you want to see a gig I did in 2019, go on there.
It's on YouTube as well. You've got a gig on YouTube.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
if you Google me, I'm on my raw sets on YouTube and articles and other stuff. But Instagram is where I update everyone on a consistent basis. So
Any upcoming gigs? Any gigs?
no, just a few like smaller gigs around the place, like leading up until the end of the year, just getting ready for the things ahead, really. Next year is going to be a big year. I'm doing Comedy Zone at the Melbourne Comedy Festival, which is a kind of residency for emerging comedians that's supported by the festival.
Nice.
5 emerging comedians, and we perform every night except for one for the whole Melbourne Comedy Festival. So that look out for Comedy Zone in April 2023.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Hi, Epic.
Excellent, Alexandra. Thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you so much.
Thanks so much for
Epic.
your time. And yeah, to all the listeners, go check her out next time she's in your town. Honestly, it'd be worth it. Absolutely. We'll have to come and see you next time as well when you're in Sydney.
I would love that for sure.
Yeah, brilliant.
I'm down for a proper run at the end of Feb. So at the end of Jan, start of Feb. So I'll let you know.
Let us know. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Best of luck, Alex. Thanks for